Hey, welcome back to Play and Trade Guitars. I'm John, that's Zach behind the camera, and this is Play and Trade Guitars, where we play it and trade it. We're checking out the Classic Vibe series, and we're looking at the 60s Stratocaster at a price point of $429. I'll tell you everything you need to know. We'll put it on the bench and pull it apart, and of course, we're gonna plug it in and play it. If you're in the market for a Classic Vibe Strat or any other gear, click to buy new gear using our link. It helps us make these demos, so we really appreciate it. We're also giving away an American-made Martin acoustic guitar when we hit 100,000 subscribers. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't done that. You gotta subscribe to win, and you gotta enter via Gleam. All that's either down in the comments or down in the description. All right, without further ado, let's take a first look at the Classic Vibe 60s Strat in beautiful candy apple red. I'm always a sucker for candy apple red on a Fender guitar, and this is looking great, metallic finish candy apple red. And Classic Vibe is going to be vintage inspired at a great price. I have talked before that typically these come at this price level with some setup, so I'm going to tell you when we move to the bench kind of the optimal way to kind of set these up quickly that you can do at home too. And this guitar is going to sport vintage features like these vintage style Fender Strat saddles, floating trem. You've got laurel for the fretboard. NATO is the body wood. So just kind of a budget wood, but at this price, it's gonna give you the classic feel of a Strat, and we have been really impressed with this series overall. So I think it represents a great value. Let's head over to the bench and pull it apart, and we'll get it set up before we plug it in. Looks great though, I love the look. I also love the way they color the gloss finish on the neck with kind of that worn in, aged look. It just looks beautiful. So let's hit the bench. All right, starting up at the headstock, we've got the spaghetti letter Squier logo here, and this gloss finish on the neck, they call this tinted gloss, and I love that. It's just this deep hue of gloss color on the maple neck, which looks great. I always like the neck shape as well on the Classic Vibe series. 60s style Strat, one of the hallmark kind of trademarks of that is gonna be a rosewood fretboard. This is not rosewood, but it's laurel, so they're approximating the look of rosewood. You got these pearloid dot inlays coming down to the body, metallic candy apple red finish, 3 Classic Vibe Squier single coil pickups, and I'm always impressed at these single coil pickups that they're putting in the Classic Vibe series. It sounds great. You got the vintage style trem, and I'll tell you what, you will find often that in terms of setup from the factory, the trem is totally decked down, so I'll show you how to set that up as well. Flipping it over, you can see it's going to be just your standard 4-screw neck and trim cavity here. As I think ahead to setting this up, I'm looking quickly at things like the string height. Typically the Classic Vibe series ships with the strings pretty high. So I'll show you how to lower this down. After we lower down the strings, we'll check the truss rod and see if that needs an adjustment. And then we'll check things like pickup height, the trim setup, and the rest of it. So let's get the strings out of the way and get some measurements and tackle that setup before we plug it in. Go ahead and pop this neck out. A few factory marks here. We have the modern truss rod adjustment at the top of the headstock, which makes adjustment a whole heck of a lot easier than the vintage style. I'm glad they went with that. We also have a more modern 9.5-inch radius, and you can see that slab of laurel there on top of the maple. We have a synthetic bone nut, comes in at 1.65 inches. We have a first fret at 0.8 inches, up to a 12th fret of 0.85 inches. Body thickness, 1.76 inches thick. So satisfying. We can go ahead and peel this plastic off these pickups and then flip over this 3-ply pickguard. All right, we got these mini pots, 250K. Everything's hand wired, single coil pickups. And then check this out, the body is routed actually for a humbucker and bridge if you ever wanted to mod that. And you might be able to fit a humbucker in middle. Go ahead and flip on the multimeter, get a reading on the pickups. We're at 6.2 in bridge, 5.9 in middle, and 5.5 in neck. Standard 5-way Strat control, and then volume, tone, tone. Get a look at the trem block there. And as I said before, it's currently basically decked down, meaning that there's enough tension with these screws pulling these springs that it's not floating the tremolo at all at the moment. So we'll talk about how to set that up. So we know these guitars are at a great price, but what I want to do is make it as playable as possible. So the factory setup is hit or miss on these. Luckily this one, in terms of the quality control, the construction, doesn't have any major issues at all. What I do want to do is make some adjustments with regard to action or string height, possibly tighten the truss rod a little bit, get this trem floating because it's just decked down currently. And then once I make those adjustments, we'll talk about things like pickup height and the rest. Squier does include some information on how to adjust the truss rod. It also includes things like factory specs on string height, which is all contained in here. I'm more of a do it by feel, and I think you can too. A lot of it is going to come down to the kind of action you want. You can have kind of real low action, or you can have what I like, which is kind of medium action. I do a lot of string bending, and I like for there to be enough clearance so that I can get a clean bend on the string. So this guitar is not too far off. I can tell the strings are a little high. So in order of what I'm going to do for setup, I'm going to bring the saddle height down. Once I get the string height there, I will go ahead and get the truss rod correct. If there's too much bow, I'll tighten the truss rod a little bit and flatten that out a little more. We'll get this trem floating. We need to loosen the screws in the trem cavity. And then once all that's sitting where we need it, we'll check the pickup height and make sure that that looks good. And then we'll be able to plug it in and make some sounds. So let's get started on this. Looks like I have about 5 turns of my fingers. I consider this not a perfect science. I'll check for buzz. Now, nobody knows how a guitar should feel to you better than you, so I think a lot of this is personal preference, but there are certain things you certainly don't want. If the action's too low, you're going to have buzzing all over the place. Now that A string sounds okay, but the E string, to me, has a little bit too much buzz, so I was pretty close. I got everything pretty much right where I wanted, except it looks like I went a little bit too aggressive on lowering the E string. So this is where I say I'm just trying to show you that it's just more of a feel thing. If you're getting buzz, then you're just going to have to go ahead and raise the string up. So now I'll give it about 2.5 turns. All right, that feels a lot better. So now that I have the string height where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and check the actual bow in the neck, and that has to do with the truss rod. I like to hold down the frets and give a tap. And if you have a little bit of bow or relief in the neck, which is normal, you'll have just a little bit of clearance to hear that string move. And actually, as I look at it, this doesn't even need a thing. If you found that it had too much bow, you'd use the wrench that they gave you, and you'd give, maybe a quarter tighten at a time. And if the guitar neck was, if the strings were touching the frets and it was the other way, you would loosen the truss rod, maybe a quarter turn at a time. Speaking to their quality control, I will say this one actually, the truss rod, now that I lowered the strings, is fine. So we can go ahead and move on to the trem itself. Let's flip this over, and we'll start to loosen the trem assembly here. I usually do like 2 and 2 at a time here. I will tell you that Squiers use really cheap screws and they strip out really easily, so just try to give a lot of push here as you do this. Oh, there we go. So now you can see actually after those turns, we'll give you your classic kind of Strat tremolo. I got a few quick tests that I do, and now I haven't beaten these strings up yet, and you've really got to wear these strings in by stretching them before you start to actually play. But the quick test I'll do after this setup is first check my tremolo. You can also hear generally. I can chord without buzz. And then big test for me personally, I like to bend at various points and make sure I'm not choking out or buzzing. So I have a clean clearance. An extra step, extra credit here would be to check intonation. I'm not going to do this on this guitar because it actually sounds pretty well intonated, and I prefer to do this after I stretch the strings out, but just for a quick highlight, play the open E, play the harmonic, and then see how close that tone is. Sounds pretty much dead on to me. So again, speaking of the quality control here, maybe we lucked out and got a really good one, but I can just tell as I play, the intonation sounds pretty good, so I'm not gonna have to do anything. Intonation generally, if the pitch was too high, you'd have to increase the length of the string, so you'd pull the saddle back. If your pitch where you're trying to intonate is too low, it means that you need to shorten the run of that string, so you bring the saddle closer. But this one actually came from the factory. Again, testament to the A rating we gave it earlier in the unbox. Don't need to do a thing to it, so I'm happy to see that. As you lower the strings, sometimes you'll find that the pickup height is too close to the strings. In this case, I'm not really seeing that. There are also kind of factory specs for where you want the pickups. Generally, the closer you get to the strings, the hotter it gets. You don't want it too close. You're going to start to have an ugly sound. But you can experiment with just kind of quarter turns as well in terms of the pickup height. They're not too close to the strings, so there's no inherent problem. I'm going to leave it where it is from the factory. I don't see any reason to change that either. Let me stretch these strings out and then we'll be ready to play it. All right, Strat weighs in at 7 pounds, 10 ounces. We'll call it 7.6 pounds. Really nice weight for a Strat. And then flipping the guitar around for initial reaction, I got this set up exactly where I want it. So I went ahead and beat up the strings. This is my favorite part. We're going to plug it in and make some noise. Remember, if you're in the market for this guitar or any other gear, click to buy new gear using our link. It helps us out, and we really appreciate it. Now we're going to plug this in. I'll show you clean tones. We'll dirty it up, and then we'll let it sing behind a track. On the other side of that, stick around because I'll give you my honest, raw reaction of playing the Classic Vibe 60s Strat, and I'll give you a final score. So drop a comment as we go. Let's plug in and have some fun. See you on the other side. So not in tune. All right, we are classically vibing. I'll tell you what, I love this series. I love the pickups. They've got this warm, soulful, classic Strat sound with no harshness. It's like, if you like that kind of warm, rolled off vintage tone, I think they did a great job with these guitars. This one, I showed you how I set it up to my liking. I really make setup more of a personal, from a kind of a playing standpoint rather than a scientific standpoint. I think that you'll find that it works best for you if you can learn to do it the way I do it, which is make it work for you. As long as you don't have anything obvious like dead buzzing frets or, you know, notes that choke out on you when you bend, you did it right. As long as it's intonated, it stays in tune, it's playable, it'll make the experience more fun for you, especially since sometimes at this price level, guitars need a little extra setup out of the box. All right, you stuck with me to the end, so I'm gonna give you my final score. I based that score on 3 main categories: overall playability, overall sound, and overall value. In terms of overall playability, I love the shape. This is consistently across the Classic Vibe series. The shape of the neck is fantastic, and the gloss finish, especially visually, it's beautiful too. This tinted gloss finish, it's so playable. These guitars never get in my way. Once I set them up, and I did show you what it took to make it playable in terms of the setup from the factory, but I'm gonna give it a high score in playability. This guitar did not get in my way at all. It's no nonsense. Exactly what you want from a vintage style Strat. Got the trem floating just where I want it. I use that kind of sparingly, but it's nice to have it there, of course, as part of the Strat tone. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 9.3 on overall playability. This guitar was super, super playable. When it comes to overall sound, I'm a huge fan of these pickups. I have a feeling this is gonna be a pretty highly rated guitar, especially considering the price. But talking sound alone, I really think they nailed these pickups. I describe it as just kind of a warm blanket of vintage Strat tone, no harshness, beautifully mellow, kind of mellow voiced, single coil sounds that I really enjoy. It really is a joy to play when it sounds good. And these pickups sound great. I'll go ahead and give it a 9.4 on overall sound. And then overall value, $429. It does not come with a case, so you want to get a gig bag or a hard shell case for it. But I'll tell you what, at this price, I think it's a pretty darn good value, and I think you'll agree. I'll go ahead and give it a 9.5 on overall value. I was really blown away and very happy with the 60s Strat in the Classic Vibe collection. It's gonna bring us to an overall score of 9.4 for the 60s Strat. Squier Classic Vibe, you're knocking it out of the park. We did investigate 4 or 5 Classic Vibes straight from the factory, and 4 out of 5 of them had real good quality control and only needed minor setup like I showed you. One of them had some sharp frets, but don't be dissuaded in the budget territory of guitars. Don't think that they're all great or they're all bad. Look for one that comes with solid quality control and then set it up to your liking and you will have a serious player. Everything under the hood on this guitar sounds fantastic. It's comfortable even at like 7.5 pounds. It just feels balanced and comfortable. I'm a fan. If you're gonna buy this guitar, click to buy using our link. It really helps us. You're gonna get fast free shipping, easy payment plans. You'll find that pinned in the comments or down in the description. Any gear you're buying, remember to use our link. We really do appreciate it. Be in it to win it. If you haven't hit subscribe, do it now and sign up via Gleam. We're giving away that American-made Martin acoustic guitar when we hit 100,000 subscribers. Thanks for hanging out on Play and Trade Guitars. I'm John, that's Zach behind the camera. We'll see you next time. Keep on playing. See you there.